Hey, what's up guys? My name is Carl Freund and welcome back. Today we're going to talk about dual closing and the buyer contingency addendum. Thank you, Michael Friedel, for putting a comment on one of my previous videos and requesting this video. This is how I know that you guys need help in a specific area, and I'm always happy to do more videos for you. Let's kind of get into it real quick. Dual closings can be messy. I'm 100% guilty of screwing these up. One of the ones I actually did ended up in a lawsuit. So don't do what I did. Don't be a dummy. I'm gonna give you a couple tips. First tip is don't schedule it on a Friday or before a holiday. Typically you wanna do these things on Monday with like 3 or 4 days buffer at least to kind of get you through any kind of issues that might come up and might result in somebody being homeless. Not saying that I did that, but I did. Don't do that. Other thing is don't use 2 different title companies. I use Fidelity National Title, not an endorsement, but I think they're awesome. Logistically, it just works. They've got a bunch of locations around the valley. Whoever you want to use, you're welcome to use it, but try to keep it in the same agency if you can. It's going to avoid logistical errors that can be very, very costly. And it was in my case. I made 2 definitely mistakes, closed on a Friday, and then also used 2 different title companies. My bad. Don't do that. The other thing, you want to do your final walkthrough like 2 or 3 days before the close of escrow. That gives you enough time to recover in the event that something needs to be repaired or one of the repairs wasn't done satisfactorily, or is that a word, satisfactorily? Something like that. Anyways, that you need to go back and talk to the seller about repairing one of the items, or something is not in the same condition as you expected. You're always welcome to go and do a final walkthrough like the day of closing and just make sure that the thing's cleaned out and that it's in the condition that you expected. And by the way, the condition is broom kept. It doesn't mean that it's spotless, that they have professional cleaners. People get in arguments about this all the time. Go back and read the contract. It states very clearly in the contract what the condition will be at the time of close of escrow. And the other thing too is that make sure that everybody's loan documents are at title like 2 or 3 days before closing. That means your client's loan documents are closing or at title 2 or 3 days before closing as well. If they're not, please issue a cure notice, not on yourself, but if your potential buyers of your listing haven't had loan documents to title 2 or 3 days before closing, really 3 days, it's not an active war. I don't want you guys to think that a cure notice is an active war. It's not. It's just a way to communicate the urgency and the severity of a situation. Somebody's in breach of a contract. Don't ever take it personal. If I issue you a cure notice, I will always call you ahead of time and say, hey, look, I'm issuing you a cure notice because of this. Let's tag team this thing and work on it together to come up with a resolution. This is a team effort between agents, guys. This is never a battle. This is not something that's right or wrong. You know, it's never throwing the blame out there for somebody. Work together to solve issues, and I think the whole industry will benefit. Your clients will definitely benefit. Also, please plan for the worst case scenario. So if this thing doesn't close on time, what does that look like for your clients? What does that look like for the other buyers on the other end? You know, there's 2 or 3 closings that can be held up. It's not always just one transaction. A lot of times these transactions have 2 or 3 transactions behind them, and it could be a cascade effect, right? So like, you don't want to be the weak link in that chain. I think it's very, very important that you plan for the worst case scenario. And if you do see any problems coming up, communicate those to everybody very, very early. Communicate to your client, to the other agent, to title, to mortgage, to avoid any issues. Communication can solve many, many, many issues, and I think just having a conversation like this is so, so valuable. Let's take 2 minutes. I'm gonna go through the buyer contingency addendum first. Actually, what I'm gonna do, I'm changing my mind. I'm gonna show you where you should check a box on the purchase contract. So let's get into the computer real quick. Looking at the buyer contingency addendum, we're gonna come back to this thing. Yeah, I'll go ahead and save those changes. Let's look at the purchase contract. What you're looking for is this box right here on line 36 of the purchase contract. That is the buyer contingency box. It's very, very important that you check that. Otherwise, if you don't have that buyer contingency into the contract, it's basically it doesn't exist. And so you've just removed your buyer contingency from that. So when you're submitting an offer and you guys need to sell your listing before you can purchase another property, this is when you would want to use this thing. Let's go back into the buyer contingency addendum real quick. Getting back into this, a couple dates that you need to be very, very, very aware of. But first, let's talk about the 2 different types of contingencies on the buyer contingency addendum. The first one is basically you've got a listing, it's active on the market, and there's no buyer yet. So it's kind of sitting there active, and you're like, I hope it sells kind of soon. I feel like it's going to sell soon. Let's go out and look at some properties and let's see if we can get you under contract on something and move that process forward. Two things. Number one, it is a little risky. There's some risk involved in this thing that your listing won't sell. The other thing too is that it's very, very difficult to negotiate from this point of view. It's as a listing agent, I don't really want to accept this contingency. I'd rather accept the second type, which we'll talk about that right now. And that is when you've got actually a pending listing and you've got a listing that's under contract currently, it's got a close of escrow date, you're in the inspection period, you've got the proof of funds, you've got a pre-qual, it's a solid deal, it's going to happen, and you can go out shopping. And I feel much, much more confident going out and doing that than the first one. We'll talk about the first contingency first and kind of go through some important dates because there's just two very, very important boxes that you need to figure out on this thing and some important dates here too. So getting back into the contingency addendum, obviously let's check the box. And this address here is your current listing address. This is the one that is not under contract and you're hoping that you're going to get an offer any day. It's a good market, so don't jinx me on this. Let's knock on wood. And so what you want to do here is looking at the dates here. This is basically when you get an offer. This date right here is the last date that you can get an offer on that property. So we're going to select December 1st. Today's November 16th. That's about 2 weeks out. I feel confident, we can do price drops or we can get, a motivated buyer in there and get that thing locked up by December 1st. So we'll use that as the date. And then a couple different things here. So if the buyer accepts an offer on the buyer's property by the date set forth on line 10, which is December 1st, buyer shall deliver the accepted offer documents to the seller within 3 days of that offer acceptance. Here's where a lot of agents give me pushback. And they're like, well, there's a privacy issue. I'm like, well, it's going to be kind of public record here in about 30 days whenever the escrow closes anyway. A lot of the terms on that contract might change. It's not really a huge privacy issue because it does become public record here in about 30 days. Guys, don't worry about privacy concerns. If you're submitting documents with like social security numbers or dates of birth, yes, you should absolutely go back and like blackline all those things, use a Sharpie and do that, or electronically just put a marker over it or something like that to hide that personal information. But the sellers are entitled to the buyer documents on these things. So it's very, very important that you submit those in a timely manner. If you don't, it goes back through. Basically, if you don't do it, the seller can cancel the contract and they can put the house back in the market and you're going to lose the house. So here's the thing. Line number 20, let's talk about this real quick. Buyer's contingency. If the seller does not cancel the contract within the 3 days of receipt of the accepted offer documents, because they like the offer and they think it's a strong offer and it's going to go through, this contract shall become contingent upon the closing of that pending sale of the anticipated offer, if that makes any sense. I put December 30th. Because if we anticipate a contract on December 1st, and maybe it's a 30-day escrow, maybe it's a little bit sooner if we can hustle, maybe it's a little bit later if it's going to take a little bit longer. I put December 30th. Notice it's not the last day of the month. Title companies, mortgage companies, all historically hate closing on the last day of the month. It's just a not easy thing to do because everybody wants to close on the last day of the month. There's going to be a little bit more flexibility in signing times. The processors are going to be a little bit less overwhelmed. Try not to close on the last day of the month. Let's add that into the tips of things not to do. So we'll select December 30th. And then basically here's the little line that people get nervous. Seller's acceptance of a backup contract. Let's read this together real quick. If a seller accepts a subsequent offer, which is basically a backup contract, to purchase the premises before the buyer has delivered to the seller the accepted offer documents, meaning that you got your place under contract and you were sending that new contract to the seller, seller may deliver written notice to the buyer informing the buyer of the backup contract. The seller needs to notify you, the buyer's agent, that there is a backup contract in place. Buyer shall have 3 days, and you can negotiate this is negotiable, you can put 10 days in here, or whatever it is, to deliver a seller a written notice to remove the buyer contingency. Such notice from the buyer shall include written documentation from the buyer's lender that the buyer can close escrow on that close of escrow date without having to sell that other property. Or if it's an all-cash sale, it's just a proof of funds, right? If the buyer elects to waive this buyer contingency, which I don't recommend, let me just back this up a little bit. I don't recommend waiving contingencies very often. There are some cases where we'll waive contingencies. Usually it's very, very accredited investors that know what they're doing. For the average consumer, please try to keep the contingency in there and fight for that contingency if you can. Going back to line 40, if buyer elects to waive this buyer contingency and proceed with this contract, seller and buyer agree that all the other contingencies still remain. So like you still have your inspection contingency, you still have your appraisal contingency, you still have all the contingencies that would be in the original contract. That doesn't waive them. Time periods. Line number 42, very, very, very important. We're going to talk about this kind of an extent. You got two different options here. Line number 44, if you see this, the date that the signed contract and any incorporated counteroffer, remember the date of the contract is the date of the last signature and delivered. So is delivered and received by the appropriate broker as indicated of Section 8I, which is the purchase contract, not the addendum of the contract. Or the other option is 3 days after the seller's receipt of the buyer's accepted offer documents, provided that the seller does not want to cancel the contract prior to the expiration of that 3-day period. And so basically what that says is that you go ahead and you get a offer and the seller doesn't want to cancel that contract because they've looked through that contract and they feel that that buyer can reasonably perform. That's when they actually go ahead and start the date of your contract. So your inspection date wouldn't start until that date. That's kind of what I would recommend doing in a lot of cases. Use your personal judgment on this thing. I like the extra safety buffer. I want to be able to make sure that we're not spending money on inspections, in appraisals, and all the other thing, just to have the deal blow up the last second. So let's push that contract date actually to the date that you get your accepted offer. And you present that accepted offer documents to the seller's agent. That's what I would do. Use your personal judgment on that thing. There's no judgment here. Which way you do it. Maybe talk to your broker, and your broker might have a different opinion on that. The second type of contingency that you have, and it's a much more powerful contingency, in my opinion, and it's easier to get accepted, is when you actually have a pending listing or it's under contract taking backups. Kind of the same thing. When you're out negotiating and you're trying to negotiate, especially in this market where it's maybe a neutral or a seller's market, and you're submitting your offer and you're saying, hey, I hope I get an offer soon. I don't really know what that's going to be, but I promise you I'm going to try my hardest to get this thing under contract. I think it'll sell soon. That's a hard contingency to sell. The easier contingency to sell is the second one on line number 49, where you're in there and you're saying, hey, look, we've got an accepted offer. We have a real buyer. Maybe they're already through the inspection period, or maybe they're a scheduled inspection and scheduled appraisal. Hey, seller, here's their proof of funds. Here's their pre-qualification. Here's the title documents. Here's the earnest money receipt. We feel like it's a strong offer. It's 99% sure that this deal is going to go through. Please accept our offer even with a contingency, okay? And so that's what I would fight for. And then line 51 is basically the property address. It's the listing address of your listing with your current clients. And then the other thing too is that line number 53, buyer's contingency. If the pending sale date or pending sale, the buyer's property does not close escrow by, and I put it 30 days out, right? So it's technically it's November 16th today. You could put that like December, whatever the close of escrow date is expected to be on that new contract. Basically, you just say if they can't close, then the earnest money gets sent back to the buyer. That's a good date to have. And so then let's look at line 55 and read this thing together real quick because I think it's very, very important. Cancellation of accepted offer for the buyer's property. If buyer's accepted offer cancels for any reason, the buyer shall be given basically two different options here. You can deliver the notice to the seller within 3 days of that cancellation. 3 calendar days, not business days, calendar days. Very, very important that you have that distinction. 3 days of buyer's receipt of the cancellation and provide evidence of that cancellation, which would just be like maybe it's a loan contingency notice, or maybe it's something from escrow just saying that the deal got canceled. And then notice to seller shall state basically the two options that you have. The first option is very simple. Immediately cancel this contract. All the earnest money goes back to the buyer. Or the second option would be you can go ahead. However, you're going to have one of two things. A note from the buyer's lender saying that, hey, yeah, they can close by the closed escrow date, not pushing it back. Now you can write an addendum to push it back if you needed to. But that close of escrow date without delaying the sale of the close of the buyer's property. Or if this is a cash sale, basically the ability to prove funds and that they can actually deliver cash to title on the close of escrow date. So those are the two options. Select one of those two options and move forward with the contract if you feel comfortable that you can get it done. If you can't, I know it hurts, no harm, no foul though. Get the buyer's earnest money back and maybe try it again later. So basically just initials here on line number 66. Things I asked for on line 70, this proof of that the buyers can actually qualify. When I'm a listing agent and I'm taking an offer with a buyer contingency like this on it, I need to make sure that that buyer is qualified. And so what I don't want to have happen is like the thing blows up because of lack of funds or they can't actually qualify for the mortgage that they wanted. So I'm always asking for A, proof of funds, and B, the pre-qualification, PQF, pre-qualification. And so those two documents you should always put in there. In my opinion, as a broker, I think it's just going to cover your butt, and just make sure that you are dealing with a real buyer and not some like wholesaler that's just trying to wing it and sell it in an inspection period or something like that. We need real buyers, and that's what I'm looking for as a listing agent. And then, literally just signatures on the signature lines, and you are out of there. It is that easy. So one other thing, just real quick, one final tip. If you're the listing agent, please mark it in the MLS as CBBS, and that's just basically contingent on the buyer's sale of their own property. That's how it's tagged in Armless, in TAR, down in Tucson Association of Realtors. That might be a little bit different in that MLS or in the northern Arizona, but they all kind of have some sort of thing like that, just designating that it is a contingency. Guys, if you have any questions on this thing, please let me know. Thank you for tuning in. I really, really appreciate it. Be sure to like, subscribe, leave comments, and ask questions. And if you have any other video ideas, let me know so I can do them for you. Again, thank you, Michael, for pushing me to get this video done. Hope you have a prosperous day, and we will see you here next time. Take care.